Good morning, Erald, and thank you very much for joining me to talk to the Mint from America.
Thank you so much for having me on, Henry. Looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Well, the topic for today obviously is really about the energy demand, electricity demand, energy demand of AI. And how that plays out in the politics, economics impacts, the dynamics, etc. So maybe could you start by giving a short overview of of what are the major elements of AI that demands so much energy?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. So, when we talk about AI, what I'm talking about in the context of our discussion is AI systems and models based on, deep learning and neural networks, right? And I want to clarify that right off the bat because people use the term AI to mean many different things, right? Even simple machine learning models and things like that. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about deep learning neural networks, right? So this would be ChatGPT, Gemini, Llama, Grok, a lot of the, image generators and video generators like Sora that people are familiar with. It's systems like that. And when you as a user type a prompt in, ChatGPT or Gemini, that prompt goes typically to a local data center. And so what's a data center? It's typically a large, specialized facility that just has a lot of computer systems, right? So your prompt goes to the data center. There's a lot of computer chips in there. They do a bunch of very fast calculations, and then they give you an output and it comes back to your home, right? So that is why AI needs energy because you need to produce a lot of electricity to keep these data centers going. A lot of these computer systems in these data centers, they get very hot. In fact, they would get so hot, they would be fried and stop working unless you cooled them down, right? So there's also a lot of cooling systems in data centers. Historically, they were air powered. Now, increasingly, they're liquid powered. So they're consuming a lot of water, right? And the growth of data centers themselves has been truly phenomenal, Henry. In the United States here in 2024, they consumed 4% of national electricity. In 2000, it was 0.1%. So that's a 4,000% increase in the national share in just 2.5 decades, right? And that number is projected to go even higher, potentially 10, 12% in a year or so. So it's just crazy the growth that they've had. And it's crazy how they've changed not just the American economy and the American political system in many ways. Much of American economic growth recently has really just been coming from the rise of AI and data centers, right? A lot of other sectors are kind of like flat. But they're changing also, global supply chains and global energy networks. To produce a data center takes a lot of steel and cement, right? And to produce the steel for just one hyperscale data center takes about 100 million gallons of water, right? To house all of these specialized devices and equipments, the GPUs and the memory chips and the network switches and the optical transceivers and the chillers and the cooling towers, you know, takes so much energy to build all of those things, right? And a lot of them are built abroad. So TSMC makes a lot of the specialized computer chips, for example, that end up in data centers. And they use these very complex devices, some of the most complex devices human beings have ever designed in order to produce these chips, right? And those devices are themselves made, by ASML in the Netherlands. So one statistic I always bring up, which I find fascinating, is for an extreme ultraviolet lithography machine, which etches the patterns on silicon wafers that get you the really small transistors, it takes ASML to transport one of those machines to TSMC in Taiwan, 3 cargo planes, 40 freight containers, and 20 trucks on average, just to transport one of those machines because it's so big and it has to be disassembled into its various components, shipped to Taiwan, and then assembled on site, right? So it's truly been phenomenal, the sheer growth and scale of this industry over the past few years and all of the upstream and downstream effects that it's having across the global economy, right? And it's a very fascinating story that I hope to explore with you in this interview, including, of course, the political and economic dimensions of this, which are truly fascinating but scary at the same time.
Well, yes. So we are truly dealing with an incredible phenomenon, aren't we? Um, and there's a lot, as you set out, a lot of implications in different places. If we start by going back to the data centers and electricity, which, as you say, clearly is only one part of the picture, but still, it seems to be the one part that has engaged people. And presumably, these data centers are coming into a situation where there's not endless electricity available, there's not endless water availability. So, what has that sparked in terms of knock-on effects and pushback and so on?
Well, there's been a mad rush to generate more electricity in the United States here. So, total electricity consumption in America was kind of flat for about 20 years at the beginning of the 21st century. And then with the rise of AI hardware, all of these AI chips that are coming on and the rise of, ChatGPT and generative AI and now agentic AI, there's been this massive surge in demand for electricity. So now you see utility companies scrambling to build more capacity. And of course, because if you're a utility company, your profit rates are practically guaranteed, right? It's just that, de facto communism, you get to pass on those higher rates to your consumers. So the rise of data centers in the United States it's probably the major factor over the past 5 years, driving electricity rates higher. Now, people may accuse me of oversimplifying because in some areas it's different reasons, right? Like in California, wildfires have actually been a major factor for the rise in electricity rates there. So wildfires have caused a lot of damage to utility infrastructure, and so that's required a lot of repairs and renovations. So the rise of AI and data centers is not the only thing causing higher electricity rates. So I want to be clear about that. But it's definitely, I think, the main structural factor, especially over the last couple of years in most of America. It's leading to sharply higher electricity bills. It's leading to a lot of public anger, as you can imagine. Also higher water bills because, as I just explained to you, these data centers they need to consume a lot of water to keep all the computer equipment cool, right? And they're consuming a lot of that water from public water utilities, right? So they're relying on the public system to draw all of this water. And they don't even return much of it to local watersheds because then through evaporative cooling, they throw it out into the atmosphere. So it's been a big problem. So now water rates are also rising, right? That's leading to a lot of public anger as well. But Henry, it's gotten so bad that in places like Memphis, Elon Musk for 2 years violated the law by putting these, natural gas turbines to power his Colossus supercomputer, as it called it. It's basically a giant data center. But he put in these natural gas units in there, which generate a lot of pollution, right? And they're supposed to be covered, under the Clean Air Act. But XAI, his company, argued that, well, they're actually, independent, portable power units. They're not like a big power plant, and so therefore they don't fall under the Clean Air Act criteria. Right. The EPA recently, gave them a slap in the face back in January and said, no, these units are still covered under the Clean Air Act. And so now Colossus is scrambling to get more and more energy from the regular utility grid, which is what Colossus 1 is doing. Colossus 2 is still powered by natural gas turbines, but now they've gotten permits for them. So that's what Elon Musk did is he just went to Memphis, put up this data center, put up a bunch of natural gas turbines with no permits in 2024, and then ran them with no permits for over a year and a half. Until finally there was some pushback. But it's crazy. It has gotten that bad that they're now scrambling to put, a lot of sort of modular energy generation units on site for these data centers if they can't always rely on the utility grid, which for the most part they can. Most of the electricity that data centers consume does come from the regular utility grid, but they back it up. Many companies back it up with various sources just to handle, intermittency, volatility, right, in the electricity supply. So that could be battery storage and other things. So yeah, it's truly fascinating the growth there and a lot of the shenanigans that are happening.
And I understand at the moment there is quite a political fight over the cost of electricity. I mean, obviously, and actually, the Iran war will presumably supercharge that in terms of energy costs and so forth. And part of the problem, as I understand it, is that there's a backlog of new sources coming on, that the grids are not very good at bringing on new sources, which is true in the UK as well. That's huge. There's years and years people can wait until their new project gets onto the grid.
Absolutely. As you know, over the past few years here in the United States, there's been enormous solar and wind capacity that has been constructed, but not all of it can hook up to the grid right away because there's a lot of bureaucratic delays, a lot of political delays. Um, Recently, the funny story, the Trump administration actually revoked, construction permits for offshore wind, here in Virginia. Now, a court later struck that down, but, you know, you can get a sense of, how complicated it can be at a political level just to hook up all of these power sources into the actual grid where they can make a difference. But I think another major part of the story is that there's been enormous rise in battery storage capacity, and especially in places like California, over the past few years. So that is making solar and wind more and more reliable. A decade or more ago, they used to have, big problems with intermittency and volatility for solar and wind. A lot of those problems are being resolved now, and they're much more reliable, continuous sources of power, like you might expect from a larger, coal or gas power plant.
And what about the price of electricity then to the consumers and so forth? And the politics around that? Are people blaming AI for that?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people are. So, in the United States recently, there's been a lot of local resistance in various places. Becker, Minnesota last year turned down an Amazon data center. There's been a lot of fights in places like Tucson, Arizona, and other places in Arizona where, these companies are trying to build data centers. But as you know, Arizona is in the Southwest. It's largely desert. It's very dry. So there's huge concerns around water supply, right? And, is it a good idea to put all of these data centers in this already parched region, right? So much of the American West has been suffering from drought over the past, 3 or 4 decades. And so, is it a good idea to put on all of this extra capacity? So a lot of planned data centers have been canceled. There's some of these meetings where people go to, like, their local city board meetings, they can get pretty heated. And these AI companies, when they come in, they're very shady and cagey. They come in with non-disclosure agreements. So if they build a new data center, you don't always know who owns it, right? You can see this huge facility going up, but you may not know it's Amazon or Google or Microsoft who owns it because the city board members have to sign these NDAs saying that they cannot publicly disclose which companies are involved in building and owning the data centers, right? So because once those things are disclosed, and in many cases they have been, that leads to a lot of local public opposition, right? And you get these crazy board fights, and it's insane.
And does this play out at all at the national level? Are the Democrats using this, or are they implicated as well? You know, who is talking about this nationally? Is Mandami doing that, or who?
So, unfortunately, I would like to see more pushback from the Democrats towards the unreasonable growth of this industry, but much of it hasn't been there, right? Certainly, the Trump and the Republicans, they're all gung-ho about the expansion of AI and data centers because that is driving much of American economic growth right now, right? And so that's what they're worried about. But truthfully, Henry, to your question, the Democrats were in power when ChatGPT, came into the public consciousness. And so AI and data centers had a phenomenal rate of growth even under Biden, right? And Biden didn't really do much to stop them. I think if you look at where most of the opposition is coming right now, it's sort of at the state and local level, right? So there are a lot of Democrats at the state level that are absolutely trying to push back, sort of against the data center industry, including here in Virginia, where we just had a Democratic governor, come on board a couple of months ago. And so now there is a desire to, maybe increase tax rates, try to more accurately measure their like water and electricity consumption, trying to see what can be done about people's, electricity and water bills. So most of the political action to your question, most of the resistance is happening at the state and local level. The federal government is totally behind big tech right now, right? So totally behind Sam Altman and Dario Amodei and Elon Musk and whatever they're doing.
Could that change with the midterms if the Democrats, powered by local issues, take the House? Could these issues get more visibility?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, this industry is heading for a major fight in American political economy, right? Because this level of growth is clearly unsustainable. And I think of it in many ways as kind of railroads in the 19th century, right? So railroads, as you know, there was this incredible boom, and then in the 1870s, there was an incredible bust, which caused, in part anyway, a long depression here in the United States. AI is kind of like that as well. You've had this phenomenal growth, and the country is depending on it for economic growth. On the other hand, it's leading to all of these downstream and upstream consequences in our political economy. It's making life more unaffordable. It's destroying local ecology in many places. And that is absolutely a political issue that many people are seizing on at various levels, and they should. And I think it's going to get, even more intense.
What about internationally then? Obviously, I mean, in the UK, we're having data centers coming in the EU. Is are there particular hotspots? Are the repercussions beginning to be felt more broadly internationally?
Yeah, absolutely. So this obviously, I'm glad you asked about that, is a global issue. Many countries around the world now are having a massive, data center expansion wave. China obviously is building a lot of data centers. Japan, Brazil, Britain, sort of where you live, is building a lot. Ireland, all over the place. They're just building data centers like crazy, in large part to facilitate AI. Although I want to emphasize, not all data center capacity goes towards AI workflows, right? Right now, it may be almost half. A couple of years ago, it was about a third. But nevertheless, AI is the big driver of data center expansion. Even Saudi Arabia, Henry, is building, these enormous data centers in the desert under contracts with NVIDIA, so they can, power their cloud computing needs, even though they don't have many, but it's mainly just to ingratiate the Trump administration. That's why they're doing it, right? They want to get American investment so they can be on Trump's good side, even though Saudi Arabia itself doesn't have much of a need for this. And what's funny is Saudi Arabia is carrying out this huge solar and wind build out exclusively so it can power all of these data centers that it's building. But critically, it's still producing a lot of oil so it can sell in international markets and get the hard currency, right? The US dollars that it wants. So, this is a classic example of what Joshua Pierce called, energy cannibalism, which is to say, you because our existing industrial infrastructure is locked into fossil fuels, building a lot of renewable energy requires using a lot of fossil fuels, right? And the renewable energy that you're building, it's not displacing the fossil fuels, it's coming in addition to the fossil fuels. So Saudi Arabia is a classic example of that, of where the growth in renewables is so fast that you have to use all of this fossil fuel-based industrial infrastructure in order to build all of these things. And so it's counterproductive, I think, to our broader economic and ecological goals.
And what about, is there a do data centers have to be anywhere in particular? So could you have if there's a great pushback in the US, will it just mean that the tech bros put them in the rest of the world, in Africa or whatever? Are there reasons why they want them to be in the US or into the so-called developed world?
Yeah, yeah. So, data centers come, in many different types, but to cut a long story short, you kind of need to put them close to end users to a certain extent, right? Because then you're going to have serious issues with latency and, with how people can quickly load things and use programs, right? So to some extent, you need them close to where end users are going to be. Now, how close you need them, that's a little bit debatable. But definitely there are strong economic reasons for why they want to place them in certain areas. Another point to that is, you know, uh, the availability of power and water. Those are also huge reasons for why you may want to put them in certain areas versus others, right? So that's a critical driving factor as well.
So it seems that we are moving towards a crash and a restructuring at the very least, as I understand that the current services that people are paying for are not economic, are subsidized, the free access, et cetera, et cetera. And adverts won't sort that. So, in a sort of sort out, what's going to happen to the data centers? Are they just going to, do you think, repurposed, or um, I don't know. How could that play out?
Well, I definitely think there is going to be a crash in this AI bubble, right? Every time there's been a major technological wave in modern history, there has been some kind of crash, right? So, railroads and steam, radio, the internet, we have the dot-com bubble. Every time a new technology comes on, there's phenomenal early growth, and then there's a crash. But critically, even though the railroad boom ended in the 1870s, that didn't somehow mean that, the Western world consumed less energy in the following decades, right? No, energy use still expanded, railroads still expanded. It's just what happened is the growth rates sort of came down. So I don't think that when everything crashes, and it absolutely will, because this level of investment is unsustainable. And in fact, many AI companies are taking on enormous debt, especially from private equity firms. And then those private equity firms are taking on debt at record levels from the regular banking system, right? So from big banks like JP Morgan and Bank of America, in order to fund all of this, data center build out. So eventually it's unsustainable. This debt is going to go toxic, and there's kind of going to be a bust for a little bit. But that doesn't mean that people will stop building these things. I think the world of AI, at least under the current capitalist framework, is here to stay, right? And so it's going to change over time. The growth rates aren't going to be there, but there will still be some growth after the crash happens, whenever it does.
Brilliant. Well, that's been absolutely fascinating, Errol. Thank you very much for talking us through that. I think those sort of nuts and bolts of how this is playing out in communities and politics and so on. And I think, yeah, how the crash plays out and who gets saved by whom we'll have to see. But that's been incredibly useful, and thank you very much for talking to us today.
Absolutely, Henry. Thank you for having me on.